You're listening to the Real Estate Runway podcast, powered by Quattro Capital, where we are all about alternative business and investment strategies to help you amplify life and maximize wealth. Here's your host, the recovering engineer turned multifamily investor, Chad Sutton.
Friends, I am so excited to introduce a friend of mine, a co-investor, someone I've bought properties from. His name is Pratti. It's a fantastic interview where he's going to go into how he kind of got his start in wholesaling when he was going to school to be a nurse anesthetist, and transition from that into buying multifamily all before he was 25. He's since sold off all these properties. He has bought into several mobile home parks and has, I think 170 pads under contract right now. And he's just really a visionary on, looking towards longer term assets and identifying value plays and finding deals. So I cannot wait for you to learn from him. Here we go. Good afternoon for another episode of the Real Estate Runway podcast. I'm your host, Chad Sutton, and I'm joined with a good friend and business colleague, Mr. Pratti. Peter is a real estate investor who received his start purchasing multifamily apartment buildings using investor equity primarily. He has since sold these apartments and transitioned into mobile home communities with 173 lots owned and another 2 parks under contract. That's a total of about 400 lots after the current properties are purchased. He is also a full-time commercial broker specializing in development land and multifamily brokerage. I think it's easier to ask what this guy doesn't do. Without further ado, Peter, it's great to have you here. How you doing, man?
Doing all right. Just trying to adjust to the continually changing environment that we're in right now. I think the strong are proving themselves as we speak. So,
it wouldn't be any fun if it wasn't changing, would it?
yeah, exactly. So I know you guys are moving and shaking too. So everybody's trying to get their deals done and do them well. And it's tough right now, but we're doing it.
That's right. That's right. We've even done a few together through this time. So it's there's a lot of waiting to be had,
Yeah, exactly.
Cool, man. Well, I know you're a busy guy. Let's get right into it. I'd love to start off with just a little bit of your story, man. Just tell us how you got to where you are, any high points you think would be important for the audience. And then I'd love to dive into some particulars.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I started out in school. I was going to be a nurse anesthetist. So I actually started off in the medical field. So those two things, real estate and medicine, are pretty diametrically different. So whenever people ask me what I went to school for, I always kind of get a kick out of that because they're generally pretty shocked. So I went to school and for that, and kind of discovered real estate in the middle of all that. And, I was taking these hard classes. I was trying to do well with everything. It was pretty hard to do both at the same time, but I kind of got through it, finished a little early, mercifully, because if I would have finished on time and went a little longer, it would have been a big problem for me. I was way too busy. So I got out of there about 6 months early with the degree. Didn't change my major or anything, but finished that up. And then I started, initially I was in single family wholesaling. So started wholesaling some single family homes. And that was a big source of everyday income for me at the time. Kind of allowed me to build up a little bit of credibility heading towards the multifamily realm. And then at a certain point within wholesaling, we started looking at some multifamily apartment buildings. And so we always knew, myself and another partner or two at the time, we always knew we wanted to get into the multifamily business and buy and hold assets, but things just kind of fluidly changed. And, still pretty young now, and was even younger and more inexperienced at the time. So we just kind of went with the flow. And so I just kept plugging along and trying to get into those multifamily buildings, and eventually took down 3 or 4 buildings. So we did a 6 unit, a 7 unit, a 35 unit, and a 20 unit. And there were some other small ones mixed in there that we were kind of more meant for a short-term flip. But those ones I just mentioned were all we had a long-term vision in mind for all those. So bought those properties using my own and investors' equity. And then at a certain point, we decided to sell and kind of divest the holdings within that company and kind of go in a little bit different directions. And that's when we met Chad here, and Chad bought everything we owned and pillaged the whole portfolio. So
I did just a little bit. Happy to do it too.
Yeah. Well, we sold, and then I started looking into mobile home communities. I knew a guy that I had been laughing at for a little while for investing in mobile home communities. Took me about a year to get around to the idea, because I had a little bit of funds that I needed to use from the sales of the multifamily and all the other things I had done. Found a couple of properties, and ever since then, I've been investing in mobile home communities. And at the same time, I work with a kind of a family office in Knoxville, a small firm, developers and brokers in Knoxville there. So specialize in land and multifamily sales and things like that. Do a little bit of leasing too. So kind of pulled in multiple directions every single day.
Man, you were just a jack of all trades, man.
Yeah.
That's a lot of stuff to do at one time. How do you keep it all going? I mean, that any one of those could be a full-time job in itself.
Yeah, someone just made that exact same comment to me the other day. The key is I never want to be a master of none, because that's the jack of all trades and master of none is useless, right? So I think
you see
that's
how I teed that one up nicely for you. I lobbed that softball in the air for you.
Exactly. Yeah, it's perfect how you did that. So no, it's very challenging. The biggest thing for me, and this is going to sound really silly, honestly, but with all the technology and all the phones and the computers and everything we have, what I like to do is every single day I take a piece of paper, an actual piece of paper made from a tree, and a pen made from ink, right? And so I actually write everything I have to do down on that. Instead of having a calendar on the phone and everything and reminders, those things have their place for certain tasks. But I like to have that piece of paper every single day that has a different task list on it, that I write things down, that I cross them off when I'm finished with that task, and I can add things to it. And it's always sitting right next to the computer or with me when I'm in the car. So that helps a lot. It sounds kind of simple, but it does.
No, it makes sense, man. It's like your tablet that is, set in stone off to the side, no matter what noise is in front of you on the computer, on the phone, whatever else. Like, this is what you got to get done. And man, it's gratifying to have a list that's all crossed off at the end of the day, isn't it? As long as they're high profile.
And know as well as I do that you can plan out your, things in your head and put them off to the side. You may get 2 things done out of 10 for that day, and then things overtake your schedule and your whole day changes into something you never thought it would be. So you have to have that off to the side and look at it all the time.
That's right. And something our business coach always tells us is you got to go with the flow. Sometimes you're ebbing, sometimes you're flowing. And, you really try to focus on hoping that those 2 things you cross off the list are at least, high green, high dollar value tasks, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes you got to handle the fires, so that's life.
Absolutely. You got to move things to the next day sometimes, just is what it is.
That's right. Well, hey, pivoting over a little bit. So, a lot of our listeners are very astute in the multifamily space, but, you're one of my few, friends and colleagues who play in the mobile home space. My partner Maurice is one as well. What did you see in mobile home communities that kind of attracted you away from what you already knew in multifamily, and how are they different?
It would be easier to start out with a few seconds of what I saw that I didn't like when I was laughing at the individual that I'm now partners with in the mobile home space. What I didn't like was what everybody sees. They see, a low income community. It's not visually appealing. It's not the kind of like sexy investment that everybody thinks of multifamily to be. You think it's going to be low collection rates. I don't blame people for thinking that, because I thought that for a long time. But now moving into what the reality is, what it is the tenants own their own mobile homes. And even though the homes are commonly referred to as mobile homes, they're not actually mobile. And as a matter of fact, the technical term for that sort of home is a manufactured home, not a mobile home, because mobile implies that you can move it around. Technically you can, but the average cost in my area to move and set up a mobile home is about $6,000 to $8,000 to dismantle it, to transport it, to set it back up, to put porches on and everything. So it's a semi-permanent structure.
And in most
And
cases, that's more than the value of the home itself, right? To move.
absolutely. I mean, especially the older homes may not be worth as much. Now, lately, there's been a shortage to where they've been worth a little more, but still, the average home age, 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s, and it's just not financially feasible to be moving that sort of thing anymore. So it's like if I have a car and it's worth $5,000 and the transmission goes out, I have to have a long and hard conversation with myself to see, is it really going to be worth it to put 2 or 3,000 into this thing? It's worth $6,000, $5,000, whatever it is. But moving on from that, the tenants actually own those structures, and you own the infrastructure and the land underneath those homes, which is called the pads, right? So in multifamily, we say 100 units. In mobile home parks, we say 100 pads. Now, some parks have park-owned homes where the park owns a bunch of the homes, but most of what I like to do, the tenants own their own homes, and you could probably see what the benefits are to that, because the tenant is more likely to have a personal investment in where they're living. And so they just pay a lot rent for the infrastructure and whatnot. And it works out to be a little bit better than, or a lot better than what you'd think, because they pay on time. It's a smaller amount of money. If they don't pay, they have to leave the premises, and the park takes possession of the home. So it's a lot better than what people think. And there's a lot of aspects to it, but that's a short overrun.
It's very interesting. So, coming from the multifamily space, right? And I think a lot of people are pretty in tune with what the plan is when you go in and buy a multifamily property these days, right? You go in, you're ideally finding something that is maybe performing less than optimally, or at least has some meat on the bone. Maybe it's performing just fine, but it's ready for recapitalization. Someone comes in, spends a little money, slaps granite down, whatever the play is, right? And all of a sudden you magically get this higher rent. We all know that if someone doesn't pay, you can evict and pull someone out. At least you used to be able to, right? One day that'll come back. And so how is the business plan different? Like, talk to us a little bit about how one aims to purchase a property and make money in mobile home parks.
Mobile home parks, it is a little bit different because you don't have that building, right? So, it's different. You have roads, you have infrastructure, you have signage, you have different things. It's not the same as an apartment complex by any means in that regard. When you're buying a mobile home community, most of the owners, and now it's being consolidated quite a bit, but a lot of the owners are what we refer to as mom and pop owners. They're, maybe looking to retire, and they're looking to kind of enjoy the rest of their, retirement and reap the fruits of their labor. So,
yeah.
A lot of it is that they just haven't raised rent in a while, and the lot rents are under market. You may have a market where the lot rents are 300 and they're renting for 180 or 200 a month. Well, if you kind of extrapolate that over 80 units or 80 pads, and you raise $100 a month, that can make a major difference. Now, most of the time they need work, road work. There's bad signage. The community is not having an enforcement of rules. There's trash maybe that's being left out. There's things that need to be repaired around the community that don't make it look as good. They're not having community events. They're having water leaks all the time. I mean, there's many things that you can do to improve that community that you can justify that rent raise, because there is a market lot rent, just like there is a market rent for apartments. And so that's kind of the gist of it, and just depends on the property, but most of them are along those lines.
That makes sense. Are there any kind of showstoppers for you? So I know some people don't like park-owned homes, and I can see the case for why one would want them and why one would not. Some people only buy parks that are on city utilities, so they don't have to maintain the pipes. I mean, are there, what style of investor are you, and are there any kind of no-nos for you when you're looking at a park?
Well, yeah, you have to be a little bit more flexible. I mean, there's not as much product out there as far as the asset class is concerned. I don't know the exact numbers. I'd love for someone to tell me what the exact numbers are. But with apartment complexes, I'd be willing to venture that if there's 100,000 apartment complexes in the United States, there may be 10,000 mobile home parks. I mean, I don't know. Those are random numbers, but
and shrinking,
I'm sure
by the way, shrinking every day.
And shrinking at 1% a year, from what I hear.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be willing to bet that maybe there's 10 complexes for every one park or more
Wow.
ratio. So yes, you have to be a little bit more flexible in what you do. As far as what you don't want wastewater treatment plants. You don't want lagoons for your sewage. I mean,
Ooh.
People do these things, but the cap rates increase. People are paying less of a valuation. They're not as desirable. So what I look for is city utilities, city water, city sewer. And on the water side, you could see something with well water where there's been a well that's drilled. I mean, it's just not as desirable. It's just not as straightforward. Septic is something I will do. I do own a property on septic, but that's a little bit more straightforward. There's plenty of people and companies that take care of septic tanks. Not exactly a lot of companies that deal with wastewater treatment plants. And your options, if one of those fails, are not that pleasant, believe me. So those are a couple of the pitfalls. And as far as park-owned homes, some people deal with park-owned homes. I prefer tenant-owned homes. If you're in a really strong market, you can convert to tenant-owned homes, because remember, what you're trying to have is you're trying to hit the angle of the tenant taking pride in owning their own home and paying you almost a quasi land lease to have that home on your land. When the tenant is renting a home, they don't put as much care and effort into maintaining that place, and they don't stay there as long. We have tenants at our properties that have stayed there for 25 years. That's their house. I mean, it's just like any other neighborhood. I mean, yes, it's a little bit less of a lower income base, but there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, everybody has to live in a nice, safe, clean community.
Exactly.
And with tenant-owned homes, you're much more likely to have that result.
I love it. And that's so true. I mean, really, whatever level you're living at, everyone's looking for safe, quality, and affordability, right? But let's hit one more thing on the mobile home park side. Inevitably, someone's going to stop paying, right? And let's just hit this one on the head, because I know people think about, well, how do you evict them, right? Is it an eviction? Are there more creative strategies that you use, like a cash for keys maybe works better, or something like that? How do you address non-payment if you do have it?
Yeah,
Have you had
there's
any?
actually, I mean, there's two processes you have to go through. You have to go through an eviction process when they own their own homes, and you then may have to go through an abandonment process. Now, again, here's more flexibility. With apartments, if someone's not paying, you have no choice as a landowner, an apartment building owner, but to file that eviction very promptly, because you don't want 6 months of revenue being lost and damages and costs. I mean, it's a lot of money, that people sometimes don't realize. With a park, it's a little bit different because they're in a more permanent situation. So what we try to do is work with them the best we can. Maybe if they fall behind a month, I never did this with apartments, but if they fall behind a month, maybe you give them a little bit of leniency, but there's not a lot of letting up you can do as far as just having them not pay you. I mean, you have to hold them to the rules of the community, but there is a little bit of flexibility with that. So we try to work with them best we can, but unfortunately, always you get to the point where 1 in 100 or 1 in 200 people, you'll have to evict them. And what that process is you have to give them a notice that they have to move their home from your property. Now, again, I don't like doing this, and it's not fun. And like we talked about, moving a home is very expensive, but at times you have to give that eviction notice, and they have a certain amount of time to move their home. And if not, if you go through the process and they're evicted, they technically have to move that home. They have to get that moved off your property, and many times they can't. So the next step, they can't live at your property no more. You have an abandoned home. You have an empty home. Then you have to go through the process of attaining the title to the home if they won't sell you the home in an appropriate time frame. And so that process takes a very, very long time, Chad. I mean, you don't want to, you'll be out of rent collection for a year or more right now. Believe me. I mean, it's taking a long time with COVID and everything. So that's why we really don't like to do that. I haven't had to actually go through this process from start to finish yet.
Fortunate.
So it's, very fortunate, but you know what? I find that it's a little more rare in parks for people to really get to that point to where you have no other option.
Well, that's really good. I mean, you threw out a number like 1 in 200. That's like what, 0.5%, so
Oh yeah.
that's a lot better than, than any multifamily community. So that's
It's
fantastic.
tough to get that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, stepping over to one other thing. So you mentioned jack of all trades and master of most, right? Instead of none.
Yeah.
One thing you were very good at, and I'll even personally attest to this because I bought all of your properties, right?
Yeah.
You are good at finding deals and finding good deals. And to the point where you mentioned mom and pop owners, I'm pretty sure you went to mom and pop owners for all of the multifamilies that you had. You bought them, you financed them with short-term financing, you improved them to a
Yeah.
degree, and you left a whole lot of meat on the bone for someone like me to come buy it and hold on to it for the next 5 years, right?
Yeah.
So, how do you go about finding deals? Because I think that's something that you must be very unique and astute at, because you found better deals than I ever have. So go
Well,
ahead.
it's all about looking at the most amount of deals you can per week. If you're looking at one deal every couple of weeks or every month, the odds of you finding the deal very quickly or finding multiple are very, very slim.
Powers
So
in
the
the
key
numbers.
is, yeah, correct. So the key is not to be that great at anything, but to be someone that can get in front of people as best you can. One of my first jobs was a window and door. It was quasi sales, setting appointments. And I don't believe that I was that great at it. I mean, I was pretty good at it. I can talk to people, but the number one thing that I did, and that one of my buddies that worked there at the same time as me did, we had good numbers because we knocked on the most doors, every single thing we had. Now, the real simple job, right? That was a long time ago, but things don't change that much. The name of the game is getting in front of as many people as possible. If you have virtual assistants, calling people, trying to set up appointment calls, trying to, knock on doors, whatever it is, those things lead you to get in front of as many people as possible. And eventually you find the right person. So there's many different methods out there. But those are a few that I particularly use. And I'll give you a quick story of how I found my last mobile home park portfolio. The guy was really hard to find. And I was going through a list. I had my own list. I had a list somebody else had given me. I had all kinds of numbers. Wouldn't you know, this guy owned 170 lots and his phone number's on there. Or not on there. I'm sorry. His phone number's not on there. So what I did was, Tennessee is a non-disclosure state for LLCs. I couldn't find his name online either. Well, turns out I had to request a annual report, which is what you have to file every year for an LLC in Tennessee. I had to request one of these from the state. I couldn't do it online either. So I had to send a check and a letter for $20 and a letter in the mail to Nashville to request this guy's annual report. I get it back a week later, and finally there's his name. I call him, and I kid you not, I say, "Do you want to sell?" He says, "Yes, I want to sell." I mean, it was incredible. I believe that and now I'm missing out, the part where I called 200 people before that and got no from every single one of them. But the point is that I believe that his name and number wasn't very accessible, and maybe that completely inefficient thing I had to do led me to perhaps get that deal. I don't know. I got a little bit lucky there, but the bottom line is you got to do what you got to do. I mean, you got to just go out of your way to get in front of as many people as possible.
I love that, man. And the more arduous it is, like it frustrates you when, like, let's say you're looking at something, you're having to digitize PDF financials that were printed with an IBM printer. They're so bad, right? If you're going through the trouble of actually taking that extra step, there's 10 other people that aren't doing that, right? And so that's how you find those deals. That's exactly it, man. I love it. I love it. Well, Peter, this has been a fantastic episode. Thanks for bestowing all the knowledge you have for us with mobile home parks. I'd love to hit 3 quick lightning round questions, and then we'll let you get back to your busy life. How's that sound? We at Quattro kind of provide ourselves with knowing what our superpower is. So I'd love to know what your superpower is as it relates to your business or profession.
Well, we've kind of touched on that a little bit. It's just the ability for me to juggle so many things. I've got, when I take a look at what my week entails, it's packed full every single week. I've got work. I've got 2 different things I've got to do with that full-time job and everything else. And so there's just a lot of things I have to do, personal, keeping myself healthy. I think it's pretty tough to fit all that in. It really is. And so I think that's something I have the ability to do.
You're a master of the 168. There's 168 hours in a week,
you know what? I never thought of the 168 hours till now, but I guess you're right.
That's it. Everyone has the same 168. How you use them is how you thrive, so that's good. Well, everyone talks about their successes, but I like failures. Tell me what your biggest failure was and what did it teach
I got to
you?
say that, I'm very relatively young, so I haven't had a catastrophic failure. We all have failures. I mean, I've had little failures. At this point, if I had to pick out something where I'm looking back and saying I should have done something different, I should have bought more properties. I should have probably not sold properties. I mean, it's hard to find deals, and it's the things that you can hang on to for a long time are very, very rare. And a lot of times in this community, we get caught up on the value add and the really high returns and all that. I mean, sometimes you just want to buy a quality asset, sit on it for 25 years, and be happy during the process. We often try to think we have to make all kinds of money in the first 2 years. We don't. So I wish I would have looked at the criteria of the returns and looked at these deals a little bit differently instead of just passing on all kinds of stuff, because it would have been a lot different if I would have just bought some of these things that were pretty good deals back then.
That makes sense. And I struggle with that as well, being in acquisitions. It's like, you're like, man, can I really pay that today? But then you look back 2 years ago, man, I wish I would have bought 3 more buildings.
Yeah,
price,
you can't go crazy with it, but quality stuff is quality stuff. It doesn't have to be perfect.
That's right. Good deal. Well, one of the 4 pillars of Quattro is philanthropy, right? So we always like to give our interviewees a chance to promote whatever cause they're behind. So what philanthropic endeavors are you involved in?
Well, at this point, I am really, and I've thought this for a long time now, for the past couple of years, I'm really waiting for a big play. And what I really want to do eventually, I was a baseball player. I played in college for a couple of years. What I really, really want to do is I want to have a league, particularly probably baseball, a league where I can build some baseball fields. I can have an all-inclusive thing where all the equipment is good stuff. They get it for free. There's no dues for less fortunate kids, because that's something I'm really passionate about. I really want less, sometimes adults, I don't have a lot of sympathy for at times, depending on who it is. Some adults can't get out of their own way, but every kid deserves a chance. And so that's something in the next 5-10 years, I hope to start something like that. And it's going to take a lot of money, a lot of time, but that'll really make me happy.
I love that, man. That's food for the soul right now, or right there. And, kids have to play the hand they're dealt. They don't get to make choices. Adults have made choices, and that's why they are where they are. So I totally respect that and love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Peter, thank you for being on the show today. This has been absolutely fantastic. I know you've probably got 10 things lined up behind me here, so I'm going to go ahead and cut you loose here, just shy of 30 minutes. But thanks a lot for being with us, and we hope to have you again on the show soon.
All right. Thanks so much, Chad. I hope everybody gets a lot out of this, and we're both people somebody can learn from, hopefully, a thing or two.
Yep. And here we are on episode 2 of recording. So I did forget to mention, how can people get in touch with you?
You know what? You can email me. You can call me. I am very comfortable giving out my phone number if you want. It's 865-850-0679. My email is P as in Peter, RATTI3@gmail.com, ppratti3@gmail.com. I'm happy to talk to anybody, and I'm not going to charge you for your time or anything like that, but it makes me sharper to kind of talk through it and teach a little bit. So I love to do it.
Yeah, he won't charge you till the second date, at least, So
well, you're getting at something there. Yeah.
All right. Well, Peter, thanks for being here. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thanks, Chad.
We hope this episode was insightful and brought value to your day. If so, please be awesome and leave us a 5-star review. Find out how Team Quattro can help you at thequattroway.com. Until next time, this is the Real Estate Runway podcast.